everybody. Let me introduce today's slide. So we are ready to kick this off. Hello and welcome. As I think some of you know by now, I'm Juliet. I'm the digital marketer at MZN, and today's speaker is Chris, our fantastic MD. Before I hand it over to Chris, I'd just like to give a quick overview. So today, as you know, we'll be chatting about merging an NGO, experiences and reality. Welcome to all. Please feel free to drop a line in the comments to introduce yourselves as you have been doing. Just a quick note, the slides and recording will be shared with you after the webinar via email. If you do not receive them, please do feel free to email us at hello@mzninternational.com. We will give plenty of time for questions at the end, but if we do not have time to answer your question, you are also welcome to email us. All right, Chris, I think it's over to you.
Thank you very much for bearing with me on these technical challenges. Once in a million times, these things happen. So, Jules, thank you very much for setting this up. We are talking today about a very short webinar, actually, but a quite important one, as more and more of our NGO partners are considering merging with one and each other. And my ambition for today is to share our experience with this. MZN works with around about 300 NGO partners every year, so that's quite a number, and some of them are going through mergers, acquisitions, joint ventures, and other forms of merging. We'll talk about the terminology here later, and I know that many of you are considering that, so hopefully we can have a few slides only, and then have an interesting conversation around it. Because we had some technical problems just now, I just want to make sure that everything works. Jules, you can see the slides, you can see me, my voice is all right?
Everything's great my side, thank you.
Great, okay. Most of you will know MZN by now. My name is Chris, and I think Jules has one more announcement, isn't it? Our in-person training is back, is that right?
Ah, yes, I was going to mention it at the end, but since you brought it up now, we have 3 amazing in-person training courses set up. If you look on our website under training courses, you will see all the information there. We have had many signups and we're excited to get your company or you on board.
Great. Yeah, there's been a lot of demand on that one since COVID. We thought we'd go fully digital and you told us not to. Okay, here we go. Right, merging. So today I'd like to give a brief overview about the mergers, quickly define what we actually mean with it, immediately go into what makes it successful and what makes it fail. So pretty, short, condensed set. I'm hoping to not talk for more than 15 minutes, frankly, so that we then have time for questions and answers. So therefore, please, as you have any questions, as you have a topic, a thought, an opinion, put them into the Q&A right now. And I think the wonderful Jules will help us sort them through and put them in some sort of logical order. Okay, so let's kick it off. The merger market, the merger activities are all up. In the UK, we've seen 58 mergers involving 116 organizations in 2018, 2019 in that year, with over half of them involving small non-profits with under £1 million of revenue. So you can see with the numbers 58 to 116 that these are mostly mergers one-to-one. In the US, it's slightly different. Early reporting there, these are the 2021 and 2022 numbers. We've become so far aware of, and we've corroborated the date with our membership organizations in the US, of 112 mergers involving 280 organizations. So if you compare the UK to the US merger organizations, you can tell immediately that something different is going on in the US, where clearly more than 2 organizations are often getting together by virtue of 280 organizations only in 112 mergers. So, 2 or 3 organizations getting together. In Europe, it's on continental Europe, I mean here, this trend is continuing. In 2022 and 2021 so far, we've seen 85 mergers involving 350 organizations. On my side, I've seen a lot of mergers that are programmatic in nature, where organizations see, hey, our funding is drying up or our traditional grants are drying up. We need to expand programmatically or geographically into a new area. So it's not uncommon for organizations that are focused on water to merge with TVET, or technical vocational training, or agriculture-based organizations, because they are programmatically complementary, or peace promoting organizations getting together with organizations that provide economic strengthening, because again, they are programmatically related in some countries. So we expect there to be a substantial surge as well in EU and non-EU structural mergers. That should be 2023, I'm sorry. There is a lot of activity in our pipeline about NGOs right now, considering spin-offs, mergers, and structures. And a lot of them involve US entities. I think that is because, for my personal view, I think that is because FDs have become more sensitive to the fact that European funding alone is probably not going to fund the organization sustainably, whereas in the US you can achieve a higher NICRA rate. If you mix and match that, you get to a more diversified and a higher unrestricted rate. And that has certainly been true for many times. But what do we actually mean by mergers? Sorry, I've jumped there a bit. What we actually mean by mergers is not just two organizations joining. There's a whole sort of host of terms that we can, imperfectly structure around here. So there's this merge of equals, and that is probably what most of you think.
Sorry to break you up, Chris. I seem to be getting a bit of a delay. Is anyone else?
Jules, can you still hear me? Jules, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm back. I'm not sure whether that was my side or your side.
No, it seems to be stable on my side. Okay, other people say that it's okay for them as well. All right, okay. Jules, I think it's you this time.
No, apologies, everybody. Sorry for breaking that.
Sorry, okay. It seems to be difficult today. Anyway, so the merge of equals is probably what you consider, what most of you immediately think of when we say the word merger, where two equal organizations come together and say, hey, we should be better working together. There's also the merger that is promoted to get a new structure. For example, where we say, hey, we need to fundamentally restructure, we need to enter into the private sector, for example, we need to go get closer to the financial sector, to elicit more funding coming in. And they are using a merger as a restructuring tool for themselves, to change themselves to whatever, and they need to change themselves, usually involving another party, of course. And this is merger of many. We've seen this a few times in the Nordic countries these days, where lots of smaller organizations come together and they form either an association where each entity is still legally independent, or they actually properly merge everything into one organization. And then there's a proper takeover, where one organization takes over another one. Because no real money is changing hands in our sector, this is usually done in order to protect the valuable programs of a financially struggling partner. So it's usually not amongst equals. There's the asset transfer, where the organization says, no, I just want to cherry pick this program, this country offers, and then the rest can go away and die. And then finally, there's a spin-off and die well, which is a bit morbid, I'm sorry. What I mean here is there are organizations which have come to a conclusion that their business model just isn't functioning anymore. But a part of the business model does, so they spin that off and let the other part die well, have an orderly wind down. That can be the beginning of great new starts. Needn't be so morbid as I make it out here, and that happens more often than I think I would have estimated to be the case 2-3 years ago. Now, this is an imperfect number of terms here. I hope you can that helps structure the conversation going on afterwards. We'll have to make sure that we look at a few realities. The sheer reality is that if you are considering a merger to save costs or create some sort of synergies, then I've got to have to be the bearer of bad news. Most mergers fail to deliver these. And there's reasons for that, and we can talk about that in a second. The change mergers, those where new structures are being created, they tend to work more often. And they, particularly when an organization tries to expand into a new sector or into a new income market or change the NGO structure towards something else, they are the more successful ones of the mergers that our US friends and here AMZ in Europe have seen. So maybe there's some questions around that, and we can talk about that later. Good. Now, a very short summary of the two key questions. A merger is a complicated thing. It's a major undertaking, and everybody's exhausted afterwards. But there are sort of two questions. I know there are 3 lines here, but they're sort of the same, the bottom 2. There are 2 questions which are absolutely essential. Number 1 is we need to be clear on the synergies. You know, what are we trying to save on costs, or what are we trying to double in on income? So that's what I said about clarity on why does 1 + 1 = 3 in this instance. So I've seen this in an example, for example, very well done between a UK and a European organization that had similar fundraising markets. And by speaking to a larger audience across these two, they said, look, we can just fundraise more efficiently. We can save on some of the fundraising team, and we can merge our mail lists, merge our outreach, and fundraise more efficiently. They have actually chosen to keep the 2 brands intact, which makes total sense in a fundraising organization, but join and merge the operations in behind. And that is a pretty clear rationale for a merger. Sometimes the reasons why 2 organizations should join each other are a little less murky, and feel constructed and feel a little bit labored to express. Where you are not absolutely abundantly clear where the cost savings or the income increases come from, I would either investigate this further or step away from it. The other question is a two-part question. What can we do only together, and what can we save when we do? So it's pretty obvious. Are there things, either programmatically, impact-wise, donor access-wise, employment proposition-wise, that you can only do together, that neither of the partners, or 1 or 2 or 3, can do by themselves? So the typical example here is an organization that wants to expand into a institutional new donor market, but wants to acquire all the track history of, say, US for applicants into USAID. So they find a US partner, they merge the programs in the field, they save some funding and some money on that, they gain a lot of geographic reach, therefore, and they can apply with the partner's track record to USAID or the European Union, for example. And that makes institutional funding very much more successful. So that's an example where this is pretty clear. Again, if this isn't particularly clear in whatever merger you're considering, I'll probably stay away from it. So here are a few key success factors in any merger. Sorry, I seem to have gotten a cold. Today it's not just the technology, but also me. There we are. Okay, sorry about that. There are a few sort of key success factors that make a merger really work. And those are more complicated than what I'm showing here on the slides, but they are hopefully giving you a good starting point to think. The synergies really only materialize if there is absolutely clear leadership around that cultural and strategic, what I call mesh and mess. To be very blunt, a lot of leadership personnel, a lot of senior board members and senior management members are exhausted by the time that someone signs a merger. And then there's this press conference or this release to the organization saying, oh, good, now we are merged. But I'd like you to consider that the merger really starts when the thing has been signed, when the press notice has gone out. Because culture and strategic divergence can really undo a merger very, very quickly. And then, they fail to realize those synergies or all the promises that were hoped to be gained from the merger. I understand that it takes a long time to go through all the negotiations and then actually be exhausted once it's signed. But I think it's really important to remember that the real merger starts once they are merged. Finally, there's really a lot of process integration that is necessary. And it's necessary quickly to take advantage of these increased scale operations or the increase in depth. So there needs to be really strong financial and process integration expertise. Where there isn't a dedicated resource to look at the processes, be it a procurement process, a hiring process, a program design process, a business development process, a M&E process, where these aren't then really proactively joined. With a very clear framework saying they should be joined within 4 to 6 months, for example, or 8 months maximum. And then we are struggling with realizing the synergies. A lot of times, this is just left to the staff. Here we go, we are now merged, you guys go ahead it. And I can strongly advise against that. The financial benefits, I think, should be starting to roll in within 6 months. Now, this is a bit, provocative maybe, but if we are thinking about a cost reduction, and if we're saying the cost reduction is actually very simple, as it is argued in a lot of merger proposals, and saying, hey, we'd just like to eliminate what is then double, back office costs, program delivery, fundraising, for example, and those costs should be saved within the 6 months of the merger happening. And those things will not happen automatically. They still need a lot of integration expertise, a lot of time, possibly with externals, to actually be realized and be measured. There should be a return on investment calculation on the merger, of course. And then in terms of fundraising brand usage, a lot of the mergers we're advising on, they want to merge their reach and they want to increase their income, but that means the fundraising processes need to be merged. And the teams, even if they are in similar organizations, they will do things differently. And the devil here lies really in the detail. So I strongly advise to pay attention to that, provide additional capacity and time and dedicated resources to that process alignment. Quite interestingly as well, is as we've spoken to our friends of other consultants in the UK and in the US, as well as in Asia and Africa, and all 4 other consultants, and they say, look, around about 90% of those that we deem successful mergers had some sort of independent advice and evaluation service. So where the 2 parties appoint 1 independent consultant and advisor to provide independent reports on the merger as well. And that really brings in a lot of discipline to this process. Good. That's the good news. Here's the bad news. What are the typical things that make it a failure? Number 1 is often the merger becomes a purpose in itself. If the merger is the purpose of a merger is the merger, that consumes a lot of time and becomes an end in itself. And I think a merger of whatever type should achieve something greater than these 2 merged organizations. So where the merger is a tool to achieve something, like an increase in market scope or a depth in programming or whatever, or cost saving simply by eliminating double costs, then that's fine. If the merger itself becomes the aim, that's typically where things go a bit astray. It's also becoming a problem when it's done from a position of weakness. So when it's a takeover really by another organization that is sold as a merger. Usually the larger, more financially stable organization isn't particularly interested in really understanding the unique value delivery point of the smaller organizations they're not investing as much into process integration as they should. So the small organization just very easily feels frustrated, feels like it's not being listened to and just being overly dominated, causing staff fluctuations to increase massively and causing the merger to ultimately fail. Second before last, the devil here really is in the detail. You know, these silos and these double structures happen often and become entrenched, and they're really costly. I have seen organizations that have supposedly merged 2, 3, 5 years ago, but they're still operating as two different entities, as very different ones. We've seen this time and time again, where these silos become entrenched. You're not only paying for a double, but sometimes when something has to work across these silos, they're actively blocking themselves. I'm sure some of you know what I'm talking about. If not, let's ask some questions about this. And lastly, it's a people's issue. Culture and trust, where they are not proactively managed by a more hesitant leadership, trying to govern too much by consensus, is usually contributes to failure. And consensus is good, but once the decision has been made to merge, the merger needs to be executed with a certain degree of discipline. And I can strongly recommend that that is being done from a management point of view, not trying to find agreement and consensus amongst your staff all the time, because people feel very, very protected about the way they have done things. And sometimes they need to be pushed a little bit to change. Good. That is pretty much it, other than, you know, the final tips, how to get it right. All said and done, I hope I didn't freak you out too much on the merger, but M&A is still a good tool to expand reach, source additional income sources, eliminate double structures, or just to have it as an insurance policy in case the original business model does not work. There has been a surge in the mergers in order to access funding in the EU, particularly from the UK. And merging with an organization obviously starts, sort of overcomes this new startup problem. That is a good idea. And that's a valid way of merging. If you are in the UK and you've been cut out of the EU market, then that might be something you want to consider. I strongly recommend focusing on the money. I know it sounds a bit harsh, but these savings and incomes, they really need to be materialized in 6 months in order to be worthwhile. The expectation of something happening after that, I think, is, in my own experience, is progressively declining then. And finally, get it done. A protected merger with lots of follow-up restructures erodes this buy-in. It really is annoying when we go for the merger, then a restructuring, then another change process. So I strongly recommend that once you decide to merge with 1 or 2 or 3 other organizations, get it done within 6 months. Be done with it. It will be painful. You will lose some staff. There will be massive changes, and therefore we shouldn't pretend that this will not be hard. Nor should we pretend. Nor should we manage this for the long time. This should be done as fast and as quick as possible. Good. I hope that helps a bit. Jules, I think you got a few announcements there. Is that right?
Yeah, so just a few announcements. We have upcoming webinars. We do have a webinar next week, which we are postponing, unfortunately. We have a clash in our diaries. So the next webinar we have will be how to turn around a financially distressed NGO on the 23rd of August. And then our exciting webinar where we get over 1,000 attendees at times, quarterly funding briefing. So that'll be on the 6th of September. So make sure you go onto our website and sign up for those 2 webinars. And we will have an updated date on our contract webinar.
Great. Any questions?
There are a few questions here. I do ask if everyone could please just look in the Q&A box and pop the question in there rather than in the chat, just because through the chat we lose some of the questions. So Amin has written in our question tool and has said, challenges from long-term partnerships to a merger, especially 2 organizations of different size in terms of resource. What are the challenges from long-term partnerships to a merger, especially 2 organizations of different sizes in terms of resource? I hope I read that a bit better.
And so I don't know what I mean, I don't know what this last part in terms of resource means or resource. But if we are looking at organizations that merge, they are usually partners, or they have usually worked with each other before. We have seen a lot of mergers between Northern HQ implementers and Global South-based organizations, where there has been a cultural clash, frankly, quite considerably, that needs to be managed. And again, it's the financials and the process integration that was so difficult, which the effort here was really underestimated at the signing of the merge document. So those would be the main challenges I would pose.
Great, thanks, Chris. George has just asked, how do you streamline culture and build a new identity quickly during a merger?
It's a really good question, George, and thanks so much for asking it, because it ultimately comes down to people, right? I think it's a mixture between being conscious that the culture needs to be organized. So I would consult a lot up front and say, you know, what culture do you actively want to shape? That intentionality will be very important because, you know, as we all know, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Mr. Drucker gave us that saying. But we all know that the culture of a space happens one way or the other. So actively shaping it and having a conversation with the organization shortly after or even before the signature has been made on the contract, saying, what do we actually want for a culture to have, is a really good of consulting way. Once you've elicited that, and once you have a representative answer from your team about the culture they want, then I think one needs to commit to it, and leadership needs to lead by example in that. There shouldn't be too much conversations afterwards. There should be a simple key document saying the culture or the way we do things or the playbook or whatever you're going to call it, and say, this is the way we do things. And that is it. If you don't like it, there's a door. Does that make sense, George?
Great, thank you, Chris. It does make a lot of sense. Hannah's asked a question on defining a failed merger. So how are you defining a failed merger? Is it where the merger doesn't happen or whether the merger doesn't achieve what it is intended to?
Definitely the latter. I think I mean, yes, the first one is you know, also fine. If people, if organizations sort of due diligence each other and sense each other out, then that is fine. And then they decide to not merge. I think it's perfectly valid. It's worse when they want to merge, but they don't achieve the cost savings or the income reach or the programmatic implementation or the culture are being just siloed. That's what I would define as a totally failed merger, because it leaves this formally joined organization, you know, weaker than before.
Thank you, Chris. Simeon has asked, what are legal or statutory concerns to look out for when considering a merger? I think that's a great question.
Sure. So you do need legal advice on the merger. That's usually the easier structure, to be very honest, the easier question. I know it's, you know, the focus of many board meetings when they start thinking about this. But that's usually straightforward. If two organizations decide to merge, they can do this principally in two ways. Either one of the entities becomes a subsidiary of another, like this, or both are dissolved and a new one is put into its place. That's the legal structure. That tends to be the legal structure there. So it's very different from organization to organization. It depends on the country you live in. It depends on whether it's a national or international merger. It depends also if you have data transmission problem. So in Europe, you need to consider data security. You know, that email list, that fundraising list from the European organization doesn't necessarily travel to the US. So can you actually achieve the integration that you want to achieve? But a legal advisor will be able to help with that pretty quickly. That's usually not the major deal.
Great, thanks, Chris. Just a quick question: how would you turn around a failed merger?
again, with openness. I hope the person isn't anonymous because she or he is living through one right now. I really hope not. I would scale it back. I would say acknowledge openly, okay, this hasn't worked. We are either correcting it through a 6-month program right now, or we are rolling it back. It hasn't worked at all. The worst you can do is not acknowledge it and not do anything about it. I think that's the best form of answer.
Great. We have Ritendo asking 2 questions. Question 1, is there a difference between NGO merging and NGO partnership?
Yes, an NGO merging is mentioned here as a change in legal entities. So one entity, as I said earlier, one entity is either becoming formally the subsidiary of another organization, or they are merging completely, or they're both being dissolved or sidelined, and a new organization is being put in its place. A partnership could be anything: a contractual partnership, a data sharing partnership, a research partnership, where the structures and of the 2 parties aren't changing at all.
Okay, great. And then question number 2 was, what are the advantages and challenges in an NGO should prepare for work with a local NGO merger?
So we are accompanying 2 mergers at the recently and at the moment, where there has been several local partners and global north partners. The 2 main challenges have been the following. Number 1 is, again, culture and people. There has been, because the organization from the global north has more donor funding, they perceive themselves to be more important, frankly, to consider that these flow down charges, these demands and regulation that they get from their donors should apply to the entire organization. And that isn't necessarily true. The other one was the overhead share. So we still have a lot of global north organizations that keep a large part, or even the complete unrestricted element of a from the donor. So let's say you got 7 or 10% from your donor. If that stayed in London, Berlin, Amsterdam, Den Haag, Paris, or New York or Washington, for the head office to be maintained, and what's being sent to the country office is only the restricted funding, then you shouldn't be too surprised that capacity at this office is low, because they never have any money to invest into it. So I think there's a sort of financial justice part here that then plays out in the merger. And again, I would promote to openly acknowledge that, quantify it through a brief piece of research, and then see if we can find an agreement to that. Usually, once put these problems on the table and looks everybody in the eyes, one can find a solution pretty quickly. Humans are generally kind, I find.
Thank you, Chris. Well, we hope so, right?
Yeah, usually. I didn't say always.
George has asked us another question. Is it possible to comment on building trust and ensuring effective communication during a merger?
Yes. So, as with a merger is a restructuring. George, thank you very much for asking that question. A merger is a change to your staff's employer status. So there is no such thing as over communication. Communicate open, communicate quickly, communicate authentically. There is a change happening. Communicate on the progress of the merger, and communicate early on your red lines. Here, when you're even considering a merger, you can communicate to your team red lines, that things that you will and will not accept, and then the organization usually trusts the CEO or the FD or whoever leads the merger talks to not cross these red lines. So typical red lines would be, we will not change working in this and this and this country. This is so important to us, and we will continue doing so, whatever the costs. And that usually assures your team and and gives clarity to the negotiations quite a lot. And I would always be very clear on these red lines. Maybe even, well, actually definitely write them in what I call a head of terms document, saying, there's a lot of things that aren't clear, but these are the principles on which we like to contract with the other party, so that they aren't questioned halfway around in the negotiations.
Great, thanks, Chris.
I'm sorry, I'm so snippy here.
Oh, sorry. Last question then. Okay, it's time for our last question from Hannah. Hannah has asked, you gave the examples of keeping brands intact, but merging fundraising operations. How do organizations manage multiple brand identities while sharing operational delivery?
It's probably less complicated than I hope this sounds. So most larger organizations in this world have several brands. This goes to the extreme of, say, Unilever, which have over 10,000 brands, to NGOs as well, who have several brands and legacy and operations and local images and fundraising brands, etc. And it's really only a problem if the use of the brand isn't clear. So for fundraising purposes, you're obviously using an as localized brand as possible, because we know from research that local organizations get better community fundraising. For global purposes, or representing yourselves at the United Nations General Assembly or the COP29 we are now, COP30, or the large conferences, NGOs sometimes come together as consortia and use a dedicated brand for those advocacy purposes. As long as you don't mix them up, it's pretty clear how they are used. I've not seen this to be a major problem. Sorry, one last thing. I think some people confuse brands with legal entity. That's not the same. And I think that needs to be made very clear in the communication.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for going through all that interesting content today. I think we need to get you back into bed.
No. I'm drinking lemon juice.
If you have any further questions on this topic, please do email us at hello@mzninternational.com. Please sign up for our next webinars, and please do take a look at our training courses. We have locations set around the world over the next few months and early next year. We would love to host you.
True, early next year already. Wow, very good. Excellent. Thank you very much, Jules.
Thanks, Chris. Get better.
Thanks. See you soon, all.